Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight remotely. It'll still be a phenomenal session. We are here for a Q&A panel for the wonderful documentary film, Fish and Men. I will shortly introduce our panelists, but first I wanted to start off by acknowledging that the land we are meeting on this evening is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I wanted to briefly introduce myself. So I'm Sophika Kostyniuk, tonight Q&A moderator for this incredible film, Fish and Men. Having spent nearly 20 years in the sustainable seafood movement in the US, Canada, and globally, this film deeply resonated with me. I'm an ecologist, a mother, an activist, and a committed ocean champion. I'm the director of fisheries and seafood at the Oceanwise Conservation Association, where I oversee our team of scientists and accounts managers as we demystify the science behind fisheries assessments and support our nearly 800 business partners across Canada and around the globe. We work from primary producers, processors, suppliers, retailers, restaurants, and food services, all the way through to end consumer. Our program promotes seafood that is abundant in terms of its fish stocks, doesn't negatively impact habitat or other species, and is well managed. Please take a minute to check us out when you have time at seafood.ocean.org. So tonight, I'm extremely pleased to present to you our distinguished panel. I'll start off with Darby Duffin. Darby is the director-producer of this wonderful film. He brings a unique combination of media experience to directing and producing this first feature documentary of his. In his early days, he studied acting under the likes of Jeff Goldblum, and then went on into motion picture production. After that, he became a spokesperson for FEMA, where he gained an in-depth knowledge of newsmaking and the media. Today, Darby's company, On a Mission Media, produces short films for global brands, mini documentaries for media outlets, and original feature documentaries. Together with his partner in crime, Adam Jones, who is also a director-producer of this film, Adam brings an extensive background. He has directed hundreds of TV commercials, branded content projects, and really shown up in every major market in the US for national and international brands like Nokia, NASCAR, the Holiday Inn, Philips, Nationwide, and Progressive. He focuses on digital work and has won numerous awards, including the Cannes Gold Lion and the FWA Site of the Year. This is also Adam's first documentary feature. Next, we have with us Valentine Thomas. Valentine is a sustainable seafood advocate and professional spearwoman. That I want to learn much more about myself. Valentine is a two-time TEDx speaker, Forbes Changemaker, International Ambassador for Tourism and Ocean Sustainability, and social and community influencer. Valentine has a law degree and a master's in law from the University of Montreal. And last, but absolutely not least of all, we have with us acclaimed chef Michael Cimarusti. Michael is the chef and co-owner of celebrated LA restaurant Providence. Michael is a two Michelin star chef, awarded, and then in 2019, he was also awarded the James Beard winner for Best Chef West. He combines his extensive knowledge and appreciation for seafood with an advocacy for sustainable fishing practices that is evident in every single dish that he creates. if you're not blown away yet, um, I don't know what else we need to bring to you, but we are really, really enthusiastic about diving into the Q&A, learning more about the wonderful creators and contributors behind this film, and then shortly opening it up to the audience. You can enter your own questions into the chat, and I'll start reading them after we do an initial round of questions here. So first of all, I'd actually like to turn it over to both Darby and Adam, if they could just provide a brief overview of the film for the audience to refresh their memories, or maybe someone's in the audience that hasn't had a chance yet to view the film. Please tell us a little bit about what this is all about.
Sure. Well, Sophika, thanks for having us, and thanks for the Toronto Food and Film Festival. Fish and Men. So it sort of started as an idea about 7 years ago. I was living on the coast of New Hampshire, about an hour north of Boston. A small little coastal community. It was a fishing community, and I got to know a few people that worked in the commercial fishing industry. And what I learned was just how dire things have become, not just locally there in New Hampshire, but in Gloucester, where we feature a lot of our film and a lot of it shot, but all over New England. And, you know, the primary food source, primary targeted species there was cod, as everybody knows. And so, you know, as I got to learn more, as I researched more about the issues, and then just as a consumer myself, you know, I expected to see local cod in the local markets there, and it wasn't there. But what was there was an abundance of imported fish. So, you know, for me, that kind of triggered just a curiosity about why was this happening? How is all this imported cod available when, you know, I'm expecting to see local cod and it's not there? So I had originally put this pitch together for a documentary film contest, and sort of pitched it, you know, as Food Inc. meets Deadliest Catch. It's sort of a bit of, you know, we take you into the world of commercial fishing, specifically and mostly, but not exclusively, in Gloucester, Massachusetts, the oldest port in America. And we introduce you, you know, quite quickly in the film to what that lifestyle is like. And just, you know, for those people that have seen the film, we take you right into, you know, one of our fishing characters, Russell Sherman, who recounts his experience when he was a young guy in his 20s, lost at sea in the Atlantic Ocean in November. So you can only imagine what that experience is like when his boat sank. And so we quickly also take you into the experience of what it's like to be in the restaurant business, like our chef Michael Cimarusti is here, and how they are working to help provide sustainably sourced seafood to their consumers, to us. And so I'd say, you know, in a big picture, the movie is really meant to pique people's interest about where their seafood comes from, get a better understanding about, you know, the challenges that a lot of our commercial fishermen have, but then also the options as a consumer of what you can do to help support them by the choices that you make.
Thank you. That is a fantastic summary. I'm never that efficient at building my elevator pitches, so really, really nicely done. Perhaps I could ask Adam now, and I'm just getting right down into the weeds, so forgive me from going from high level right into it. But as I was watching this film, I was very curious about your kind of perception after producing this film and having the chance to kind of immerse yourself in these communities, speak to so many of the different parties involved in kind of this very contentious debate. Do you feel that fisheries in the US can be sustainable as well as economically viable?
Boy, that's a big question. Making this film was such a journey of discovery, and then you find a new path and you follow it until you think maybe we should get off this path because it's weeds, like you said. But I think one of the biggest revelations for me on this journey was the idea of flipping the model from demand base to supply base. And I think we have one of the guys in our film, Barton Seaver, who we called him like the Gandalf of the film. He would always sort of redirect us when we needed to go from Gloucester to what's happening in the seafood landscape and back. And he says in the film that we've created an entire irrational economy where we demand much more from the ocean than it can sustainably supply. And when we learned along this, throughout making this film, that you know, there's only about 5 species that Americans eat that makes up over 75% of the American seafood diet. So in that way, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. But what it does is it puts the onus on the people sitting in the seats or watching our film, the consumer. Because not to acknowledge the demand and how that determines the marketplace for fishermen to be able to target a species, for one thing, you know, and then viably sell it, have a fishery, have a marketplace for it. So I think that was one of the big sort of ahas that Darby and I had along the way, is like, no, we actually have to sort of indemnify the viewer a little bit here, make them ask more questions, make them understand that the power is with us to some extent. I mean, where you have a choice to not go and just grab something imported and frozen off the shelf, but you have a choice where you can buy something that's American and wild caught. And if you're doing that, like we say toward the end, you're most of the way there, because American fishery is the most highly regulated fishery in the world. So it's a way of thinking that I think needs to adjust to make, you know, the seafood economy improve.
Thank you. Yeah, it's there's definitely no clear answer, I think, or no silver bullet at present. Otherwise, we probably would have landed there right now. And just as I was saying, so many competing interests and different information coming in from different sources that it's a very complicated landscape to navigate. Maybe over to you next, Darby. Again, same thing, after producing this film, what role would you actually like government legislation to play in terms of governing fisheries? And if you could spend a minute maybe talking a little bit more about the model that you observed in Norway, where, you know, everyone seems to be playing well with each other, and actually prospering, while they're still taking quite a bit of product out of the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just, you know, in terms of what Adam was just saying, you know, we were very conscious about the fact that we needed to make a film that offered solutions, right? That, you know, the problems are easy to raise and they are complex, as you mentioned, they're very complex. And so, you know, that was the daunting challenge that we had, is if the industry hadn't figured it out, how are 2 guys that were filmmakers going to figure it out, you know? So, but what we did is we looked at some of the problems, and there was a lot of research involved. And, you know, in terms of, you know, Adam was talking about, you know, some of the supply chain, you know, challenges and some of the educational challenges, awareness. But in terms of your question about science, that was another one. I mean, clearly when you see the film, there is no more contentious subject than fisheries science. And then as you learn more about, and we try to condense this as much as we could to make sense to the viewer, and hopefully that came across. But in fact, we had an interview with Dr. Bill Karp, who was at that time the head of science at the National Marine Fisheries Service. We just felt it was too dense. But there's a term that he uses, and that's used quite often in the industry, called best available science. I think Jackie Odell brings that up in the film. So I guess the challenge there is that there's not enough researchers to possibly be able to collect all the data that would provide them with good information to make the choices that would probably best serve what they're trying to solve, which is how many fish are in the sea, right? Big challenge. So the problem is, and why we chose Norway, is that in the way the fishery management system works is currently, anyway, they are not taking into account the data that fishermen collect. Now, a layperson can understand the fact that who spends more time on the ocean, fishermen or scientists that work at the National Marine Fisheries Service. They do a trawl survey, I don't know, once a quarter, twice a year, something like that, just very, random select spots. So clearly, that just seems like a common sense way of beginning to find some collaboration that the industry can work with government. Norway, I think, and I hope that came across, does an incredible job. I mean, in fact, they're taking the bounty of the world's cod, and just to put it into comparison, they're pulling 1 million metric tons of cod compared to our guys in New England. That's something like 2,000 metric tons. So, they're a very successful fishery, and they do it through this collaborative, cooperative relationship that they have between environmentalists, fishermen, and scientists and regulators. So I think, certainly if I were playing, policy god, I think that would be something that I think needs to be mandated in some form or fashion, that the fisherman's voice has to be part of the equation when determining stock size and stock assessments, and how they ultimately, that trickles down to the regulations that they have to live by.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, trying to accurately assess, and you did mention this in the film, something that is underwater, something that is constantly moving, something where we don't have defined boundaries for where it exists. It's so difficult to accurately assess stock numbers. And I think that what you're pointing to in the film and what Norway has done, having more people in the water that understand that space probably better than anyone, is sort of key to helping fill this big question mark that we often have, and certainly the real-time data collection that is always a challenge. Thank you. I'd love to turn it over to Valentine now. And if you could maybe enlighten our audience first as to what does a sustainable seafood advocate do? And since you are one, and we're very lucky to have you here, how do you measure success or progress on a given issue that you're working on?
Well, I'm guessing for different people who works in advocacy of sustainable seafood, it's kind of different for everybody. But in my case, when I started spearfishing, with proximity, it created such a deep care for the ocean that didn't exist before. I'm born and raised in Montreal, and then I live in London for about 6-7 years. And after that, after I kind of started diving and spending time in the ocean, the very rare times when I was going to the store, I was kind of realizing that there was not much information available to the public, and that sometimes is really confusing. So this is why I decided that I want to help fill that gap with consumers. I have the chance to have a big enough platform to be able to reach a lot of people, so I decided to use it to raise awareness and information. So again, there was a lot of information out there, and it's not only complex, but it's also not black and white. So I actually do take the time to read a lot of scientific reports to see what's happening from different organizations, kind of pre-chew it and then share it with the public. I also try to stay very partial, so I very rarely give my own personal opinion unless somebody asks, and you definitely get it. But I'm trying to stay subjective and play the devil's advocate when it comes to very touchy, sensitive subjects, such as the use of porcelain nets, for example. I dare talking about that on my platforms, and people are like, "What's this terrible? There's no way you can before that." It's a little bit more complex than that, and those are the difficult discussions that we need to have with consumers, and that way we have the very tough job of trying to extract the emotions to be able to make better decisions. And of course, like Darby mentioned, the immensity of the ocean makes it really, really hard to measure change. So I think it's easier to actually measure the evolution of mentalities instead. So kind of the school of thought since about 2007 to about 2010 was that the supply chain is supposed to be responsible for that change of mentality. But I actually think that times have changed and things are actually shifting. So the last study was probably, I think, about in 2010, about that subject. I think that sustainability is really about making the right compromises. And that's the case on both sides, from the supply chain and from the consumer. But at the end of the day, the daily choices that consumers are making are really what's making like the difference between defining complicated line between personal preferences, education, availability, sorry, I speak French, and public policy. And especially in an industry like that, like fishing, that's driven by profit and greenwashing and a lot of shaming advocates. I think that personal diligence really became very, very important and crucial to be able to driving those change and actually be able to see a difference. And of course, that doesn't come without challenges. But in a world with so much emotion, how can personal due diligence be reliable for mass consumers? So that's something that's really, really complicated. And chefs like Michael are actually really helping changing mentality when it comes to that. But of course, I do think that right now a market-based approach is continuously very critical because we live in an era of social media, that we want it or not, of social media, of movements also, where consumer sustainability awareness is very high and consumer preference can change very, very rapidly. Like things come and go out of fashion, sadly, when it comes to food. And so basically my mission and eternal challenge is, how do you create enough proximity to the consumer to care? Like that proximity that I experienced that changed my visions completely on how I consume seafood. How can I actually create that towards people? So, and what I found so far, what worked kind of the best-ish, was to tell my journey of how, again, as a trained lawyer and financier turned spearfisher woman, which is not a real job, and how it drove me to create informative and online platform and just dedicate my entire life to fill a very fast growing gap between policymakers, NGOs, eco labels, and their consumers, to try to actually make people care.
Thank you. It must be fascinating being at that nexus of all of these interest parties. So it's great. And certainly using your voice through the platforms that you have is one of, you know, sort of a newer way of reaching audiences that I think traditionally nonprofits and advocacy groups, we've sort of missed out on that constituency. So it's great to see sort of the next generation of advocates coming up and really having high impact in that space. So speaking about consumers and thinking about consumers, Chef, I would love to ask you, you know, we really do need to and want to, I believe, move away from those top 5 species that everyone's eating across North America. How do you expand people's palates to diversify the species that they eat? And what is your own definition of sustainable seafood?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Darby and Adam for making me a part of the film and having me here today. It's an honor and it's a pleasure to talk about something I'm very passionate about. My definition of sustainability has certainly changed over the years, and I feel like it's a subject that really only came, I think, on the food world's radar like maybe 20-25 years ago, and I think that the definition has changed since then. I do believe that there is a great deal of interest on the part of the dining public to know where their food is coming from and to know that it's been harvested sustainably. And I think that also drives taste. I feel like, there are people that understand that the way seafood is marketed to them, excuse me, both in restaurants and at the retail level, is very much just driven by what is cheap, what is readily available 24/7, 365. And I think people are frustrated by that reality because there, as you say, there's an immense pressure on 5 or 6 species of fish that the world's oceans simply can't produce enough of them. And aquaculture is, a dicey sort of a proposition in many cases that does, in many cases more harm than good to the environment, and that's troubling as well. So I think my definition of sustainable, what sustainable seafood is, as I said, it's changed a lot over the years. But for me now, my definition of it is to deal with what is available to me locally in season, and I try to buy from people that are doing the harvesting themselves. And so the closer that I feel that we can get to the folks that are actually doing the fishing, the more sustainable I believe the seafood that we're purchasing is. And I know many of our vendors by name, and I've known them for many, many years. And they provide us with products that are harvested within regulation, in season, and of impeccable quality. And these are the types of relationships that I've tried to foster over the years. And as we move forward, it's something that has become more and more important to the restaurant and its overall concept. Where there are times of the year when the seasons are favorable here in Southern California, where 80 or 90% of the seafood that we have on the menu is fully traceable. And we share that information with our guests. And I believe that it's enriched their experience. It's piqued their interest. And it makes them wonder why, when they go to Whole Foods or wherever it is they do their shopping, they can't find seafood that's traceable and local and has been harvested by people whose names they might know. And I do believe, as I said, that this is a subject that's becoming more and more important to the end consumer. And I feel like the film Fish and Men has done a tremendous job in pushing that message a little bit further and exposing to people the true cost of the very, very high cost of cheap seafood and what it's done to America's fishermen, or North America's fishermen, and what it's done to the oceans, which are collectively ours. And it's in our best interest, every one of us as consumers, to act accordingly to try and sustain the resources that are available to us in the ocean, period.
Thank you, Michael. Beautifully said. So it sounds like shortening that supply chain, understanding who you're dealing with, having the questions answered that you have is for you sort of paramount importance. Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Well, thank you to the audience, because I see some questions are rolling in. So I'm going to turn it over to this list here. This one is from, I don't know if I can read out participants' names or not, but it's for Darby and Adam. So since making this documentary, what actions or new habits have you adopted personally?
Well, I'll just speak for myself. Adam and I have both moved since we made this film. We were both in New Hampshire. I was on the coast, and now I'm on the Gulf Coast. I'm in Texas. So I'd say, how has it affected me? Well, I mean, I think Valentine brought up a good point, and we try to bring that out, right? It's very confusing when you go to the supermarket. So, what we always say is, if you take one thing away from this film, it's just ask where your seafood comes from. My wife tried to buy a tuna poke bowl the other day, and after all that she's heard from me, over the years, I'm like, you really think that's, you think that's local, and it's like $8.95 for? I'm like, just don't even, So I think for me, it's just this awareness of wanting to know without being overly annoying or obsessive about it, but just wanting to know where your seafood comes from. Like Michael's saying, I mean, it's there's a desire to know that. So for me, that's just more of an innate thing, is when I go to buy seafood, and I love it. So here in the Gulf, I'm going to eat something different than I did when I was in Massachusetts or New Hampshire. So, it's eat what is local, really, to the degree that you can.
Yeah, if I was going to add to that too, I would say just it was such an eye opener when we were making this. I think when we started, like we mentioned, we were at this film for about 6 years, so there was probably the first half of that time where we didn't even realize we were going to go down this culinary path at all. We thought, the Gloucester fisherman, the iconic, fisherman's story, and we realized, wow, unfortunately, that arc is sort of a flat arc of story. There's not a huge light at the end of that tunnel right now. But when the whole idea that chefs being sort of the gatekeepers of the palate, and how we did that section in the film where we talk about Julia Child sort of creating a monkfish fishery when there was none, because she featured it on her show in like 1974. Like the idea that there are so many other abundant species that you could be eating or that you could be selecting at a retail touch point. It might make you think a little bit more about how you have to prepare it, or it might make you feel a little bit more daring when you go to Michael's restaurant and order warty California sea cucumber. But you should try new things, and it doesn't have to be a piece of cod, a piece of tuna, a piece of tilapia, et cetera, et cetera. There's one moment I always remember when there's a scene there where Barton Seaver's in his kitchen cooking bluefish, and I hadn't had much bluefish, and it's very seasonal, right? And he called it like an assertive flavor. And I always think about that. Like, there's some people that just go, oh, this is fishy, even though it, like oysters, or whatever. But it's like, no, it's an assertive flavor. Like, embrace it, man. Like, expand your horizons a little bit.
And that is the perfect segue. Thank you, Adam, for our next question, which is for Chef. What is the most unique and interesting fish that you've created a dish from, and what was the response from your patrons?
Well, we've come across like all sorts of interesting species here in Southern California through the Dock the Dish program that I helped found out here in Southern California. And I would say the coolest thing that we've incorporated into the menu is the California box crab, which is this incredibly interesting looking thing that has this incredible ability to just close itself up into what looks very much like a little box with a couple of little vents at the front of it. And when it's done that, like, you would never know that it was a crab, sitting on the bottom of the ocean. But to, bring these things into the kitchen and cook them, I have to say it's like one of the most delicious crabs that I've ever had. There was not much of a market for it, but we got to the point where once we put it on the menu, we're using 100 pounds a week. And, and this is how fisheries for underappreciated seafood start. You just need to get them out there and allow people to taste them with an open mind in a safe setting, being prepared by someone that really has cared for that product. And I think most people will find that, just because it's something you haven't tasted before doesn't mean that it's something that you wouldn't enjoy.
Yeah, they are amazing creatures, the box crabs.
Yeah, incredible.
Extremely, elusive if you don't know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Next one is for Valentine. How on earth did you become a spearfisher woman? Second part of that question, I think you've sort of answered for us, is how has this unique experience influenced your perception of the world around you and the world of food?
Oh, it was completely by coincidence. I was going on holiday, and somebody on the plane sitting next to me was carrying those big free diving fins that I've never seen before. And he started explaining to me what freediving and spearfishing was, and I thought it was so weird. And I actually got convinced to try it out, and I did. And it was all about the food all the time for me, just to be able to catch my own food, even if my first fish was an absolute horribly tasting fish. Just because I caught it and it was mine, it was just so amazing, and that just changed my entire perspective. And I was actually, funny story, I was actually petrified in the water my 2 first years spearfishing, but I liked the food part so much I just kept pushing until the diving part became really, really nice.
Yeah, good food can definitely sway us to do many things. That's awesome. Thank you. So this one is just sort of open to the panel in general. One of the audience members asked, in our personal conversations, how can we inform the people around us that there aren't actually plenty of fish in the sea, that they need to eat in ways that help conserve our oceans? Open to anyone who wants to take it.
I have one comment about that, and it's in Canada particularly, right? You have Ocean Wise, and Ocean Wise is something that we actually did a bunch of shooting about that. I was shooting commercials up in Vancouver and met a bunch of the chefs that helped found it up there through Ned Bell, and I talked to a few of your colleagues over at the aquarium as well. But that was one thing that sort of makes it very, very simple for people to sort of see. You go to a restaurant, you see that logo, and you can have a little bit of peace of mind for it. So shout out to Ocean Wise for what you guys are doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And if I could kind of piggyback on that plug, just like everyone's been saying, ask the questions. Make sure your questions are answered. Dig for information and trust third-party verification. I mean, we spend an awful lot of time, as does Seafood Watch in the US, who is sort of a sister program of ours, and many others around the globe, doing the science, digging for data, getting the information that's required and translating that into very easy sort of consumer interfaces. It's, you know, it's a yes or a no, it's a recommended or not, based on ecological criteria. And certainly now, I think that there is a great desire and a great interest in expanding that out and starting to look at social criteria, at carbon footprint, and other really key factors. But you know, trust the experts that have been doing this work for a while, and then keep pushing for answers, because a lot of the time, small scale fisheries, these local fisheries, are, you know, data deficient because government agencies don't actually have the resources to invest and assess what is going on in these smaller geographies. It doesn't mean that it's not sustainable at all. It could be the most sustainable, but we just have to keep learning more and pushing for change to happen, so that small scale fisheries also have access to these, you know, credible, verifiable programs that can keep digging further and providing transparent information to consumers and the supply chain. Anyone else?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry.
Well, I was going to say that I also feel that it's important that we place, you know, proper value on wild seafood, and that we understand that it's not supposed to necessarily be the cheapest thing at the seafood counter, and that what I tell people is, when they're shopping at home, like, definitely look for fish that was caught in the United States. If possible, look for fish that is local. And then, yes, it might be a little bit more expensive, so buy a little bit less and then round out the meal with more vegetables and more grains, and it's a better thing for the planet all around.
I think that it's also not about telling people off when they're doing something. Because of course, if you just tell people like, oh, I can't believe you had cheap sushi again today, how terrible of you, people are not going to react very well to that. So I think it's just about trying to appeal to people to whatever, because if I understood well the question, they were asking how you can tell people around you how to consume better. It's just try to find what's their sense of what's going to touch them the most. And there's so many aspects to unsustainable seafood, such as modern slavery, again, like cheap labor, big nets, ecological disaster, carbon footprint. There's so many bad aspects when it comes to bad seafood in a way. And if you want to make people care about them, just try to find that topic about it that's going to make them cringe and hopefully care about it. Seafood fraud is another big one that you can talk about. Imagine if, I think in Montreal, it was 61% of the seafood that was mislabeled. Imagine if your meat was mislabeled 62%, 61%. I don't think you would be very, very happy about that.
And that's a super interesting and valid point there, is that seafood is our last wild food, really, that's available on en masse for consumers. And it is either largely unregulated, untested, all kinds of fraudulent claims can go on it, and there is absolutely no way that consumers would accept that type of presentation of any other product that they can find in their grocery stores. So it is fascinating. There's a lot of work to do, but I think that it is absolutely doable because all of these other food sectors have figured it out a long time ago. Next, we have, I'm going to give this one to Chef first, and it says, where can I get recipes and ideas on how to eat non-traditional types of seafood besides Google?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I really don't know where to go. But I mean, what I would tell you is, trial and error, experiment. And if, like, obviously, you don't treat a monkfish the same way you treat a sea bass or something like that. So there are definitely pitfalls to trial and error. Not the least of which is the fact that good quality wild fish is expensive, as it should be. But I would say once you attain like a certain comfort level with like a bass or a snapper or something like that, you could apply what you learned from those two species to, say, a grouper or a rockfish or some other fish that looks similar to what you've cooked in the past. And honestly, just like anything else, it's repetition is what's going to make you a better seafood cook. Trust your own instincts, trust what you already know, and don't be afraid of cooking seafood. Honestly, if you can master a few very simple techniques, how to properly saute, how to properly grill, how to properly roast in the oven, like, you can be a very accomplished seafood cook in short order. And I think it's really about repetition and trusting yourself.
And how I like to say also, everything tastes good with lemon juice and olive oil anyways.
Exactly. Keep it simple. Keep it simple, and just enjoy. Doesn't always have to be perfect.
It's true. Perfection is what stops us from doing good a lot of the time, or the pursuit of perfection.
Right.
So we might just have time for one, maximum two more questions. There is one here. Now, I almost hesitate to raise it because it is such a flashpoint issue right now on the Canadian East Coast, and I'm not sure if Darby, Adam, or Michael are aware of what's going on, but one of our participants asks if you have heard about the ongoing conflict right now in Nova Scotia with the Mi'kmaq traditional fishers and the fishing community. If you have heard about it, people would like to know your opinion on it.
I'm going to play the ignorance on that. I think I've heard a few things, but certainly not enough to comment on it.
I mean, the issues between Native American fishermen and local fishermen, and who has rights to the resource. Is that correct? That's what I think
right.
I read.
Yeah, it's about the lobster fishery and
right, yeah.
Traditional access, or access as has been granted to First Nations versus the quotas that are being allotted to commercial fishermen.
We have similar things in Alaska and Hawaii, for subsistence fishing for indigenous peoples, and also in the Pacific Northwest here in the United States. I believe that it's, I think it has to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and I believe that there should be a way for, free and fair access for both parties. As long as a fish or shellfish are being taken within regulation overall, if there's some sort of compromise to be reached in terms of a catch share between, indigenous peoples and their rights to the resource, and commercial fishermen and their rights to the resource, then I feel like it should be something that could be worked out. And I know it's a hot button issue if you have a dog in that race, but it's I think these things have gone on for ever since there was such a thing as commercial fishing. You know what I mean? these issues over rights and who has rights to, certain fishing grounds or whatever. It's always been an issue, and one that I'm sure that, at some point cooler heads will prevail and they'll figure out a way to solve it.
Yeah, thank you. My opinion, if I could throw it in, is that I think that there needs to be some quick action from the federal government. We need to have all interested parties at the table and working out this problem that apparently should have been dealt with and addressed many, many years ago. There's some very vague language in the legislation, and that's what's causing the conflict at present, the interpretation of the language. I think this will be our last question. I can't believe that we're running up to the end of our time together. It's an open question again to the whole panel. We could do a round or just popcorn it, but what is the future of sustainable seafood in North America? How can the consumer stay informed?
Honestly, I think, if I could just say quickly, I feel like the pandemic, at least here in Southern California, has opened up markets for small boat fishermen, and they've had to figure out a way to survive. And what they've come up with here in Southern California is marketing direct to consumers, so that fishermen and the end consumer can meet face to face, talk, the consumer can ask every question that they like of the fisherman. And when you have people meeting face to face the same way they do at their butcher shop or at their farmer's market with their favorite farmer, then we've really achieved something. So if we can sustain this sort of progress that I've seen achieved here in Southern California during the pandemic and extend that out past this, I feel like at least here in this small sort of world that I live in, we've made incredible strides forward. And I hope, and I feel like everything exists at one point in a very, very small sphere, and then the market figures out a way to help that grow. And I hope that we can move towards that and get it past just this small community here in Southern California.
Yeah, I think Michael's right in that the more contact between fishermen and consumers, the better. I think that's a big part of the problem, is that people just don't know their fishermen. There's no personal contact. There's no connection to them, and so with that in mind, people just while he was talking, it made me think. I'm thinking of myself as well. I'm not an expert at cleaning and filleting a fish, and I think that's one hurdle that a lot of people have, is that if there were, say, opportunities to say, hey, this is the correct way to fillet your fish. This is how you can get the most out of it. And then, so some kind of, I don't know, workshops or something a little bit more creative like that, where the fishermen actually have one-on-one opportunity to interact with the consumers. I think that people would be a little bit more willing to take a chance on some of these alternative species that they're not as familiar with. And so when you combine that with chefs, and offering, some kind of workshop for, just experimenting. And as Michael was saying, just opportunities to try it and to do it. You just have to go for it. So I don't know. I mean, I think something like that, more points of contact, would certainly be a step in the right direction. And technology probably. So to the degree that technology can be harnessed, whereby, I know some of the Dock to Dish programs we're using a Dock to Dish 2.0, where there was a fish tracks, and you could see who caught your fish, and you could know the name of the captain, and that just adds more connection, more of a story behind that fish, makes you feel better about eating it and about supporting the fishermen that caught it.
And I think that for the future of sustainable seafood, I'm going to put it out there. I think that farming is part of our future. Sadly, it represents almost 50% of the fish that's being consumed around the world. Of course, like everything else, it needs to be done responsibly, but with too many people right now, I think, to put that amount of pressure on the ocean. Not with the way that the ocean is being fished right now, it have so much waste. And there's a few things that we also need to consider. The fact that about 70% of the population live under $10 a day. So you cannot ask those people to have the burden of sustainability either. So again, when you just need to change our ways and It's people with means are the ones who need to be driving, this change, and that I think that sustainability is a privilege right now, and it should be an obligation for everybody.
I will echo that. Thank you. Yeah, really nicely put. So we are at the end of our session. Thank you everyone so much. Thank you again to Darby and Adam for producing and directing this really thought-provoking and evocative movie. Thank you to Chef Michael, to Valentine for participating, for showing up in the movie, for showing up today. And of course, thank you so much to the Toronto Food Film Festival for featuring this film, for convening the panel, to Mark, who's been our technical wizard throughout this session, to Joanna, who's kept us organized and motivated. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you to our audience. You do have the power to affect change, so please continue to ask the questions, continue to engage on this issue, promote the film, follow Michael, follow Valentine, please on social media, follow Oceanwise, and collectively we can absolutely make a difference. Thanks everyone, stay well, take care, and hope to connect again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.